Hi there and welcome to our YouTube channel. This is Handmade by Hayley and I am Hayley, and this is the perfect place for you to learn all sorts of bits and pieces to help you with your sewing. So what we're going to look at today, well, check this out. Foundation piecing, that's what we're going to be looking at today. And foundation piecing is a form of kind of sewing and piecing your fabrics together like you would do with a quilt when you've got your patches and you piece them together. But when you're working with foundation piecing, it gives you the opportunity to piece fabrics in what looks like quite a complicated manner. So you can get quite creative with these, and you can see I've done a Christmas tree here with that kind of zigzag weave of fabrics going on here. Now, the way that foundation piecing works is you work with a template, and the template will be laid out usually with numbers on there or letters to give you the order that you're going to put your fabrics down and stitch them in place. The pattern that we've got for the Christmas tree is available on handmadebyhayley.tv if you are looking for that. And when you actually get hold of it, whether it's the paper pattern or the download, you'll have two pieces. So the first piece is for your template, which is going to be what you're going to work with. You will actually stitch through this. So when you're working with foundation piecing, you're actually working on the reverse and you're stitching through those lines. And then as time goes on, you will perforate and remove the fabric, remove the paper, and that will leave you with your foundation piece design. This one's got a bit dusty in the process, so you can see that's the kind of result that you will get. So I'll talk you through all of that in just a few moments, but as I mentioned, you will have your template. So because you're stitching through this, you won't be able to use it any more than once. So if you have bought the template, then you are allowed to photocopy it or save it on your computer and print it off as you need to for your own personal choice. So yeah, personal use, should I say. So nice template, which I'll take you through step by step. You'll also have this additional piece here. Now this is where you're going to cut these strips out. So you'll have these two strips, and these are extender pieces, which mean that you can then turn your A4 pattern, which is what I've done with this. I've made a little gift bag. But by adding in those extender pieces, it means that you're making it into a larger block. So if I put this on top, you'll see that is the original, but by adding in the extenders to the template, it means that you're actually turning it into a block, and the block is 12 inches square before you stitch it in. So that means you could actually put that into a quilt if you wanted to as well. So let's talk about tools that are going to help you. Pins, it's always good to have your pins there to help. Sometimes people will use a little glue stick, a little basting glue stick for the initial stages. I personally don't. You're going to need a quilting ruler or a means for measuring your 1/4 inch seam allowance, because we will be trimming away fabrics as we work. Obviously, if it's a rotary a quilting ruler, you might want to use a rotary cutter, but you could use a pen and scissors if you prefer, if you really don't want to use a rotary cutter, but I do personally prefer that. A little pair of snips, because you're going to have a lot of threads, so keeping your work neat and tidy is always a good idea, so having those there as well. And a little seam roller is handy, and all of these items are available on the website, and you can just literally use that to press down as you're working your seam. So I will show you those and how that works as time goes on as well. So that is pretty much it tools wise. Fabrics, if you're just getting started with foundation piecing and you're working with the Christmas tree, what I do suggest is you cut your fabrics into manageable pieces. You can actually do foundation piecing with the smallest scraps that you have got, but it can get a little bit complicated if you're just finding your feet with the technique. So what I suggest is you use 2.5 inch strips, which are perfect to use up your jelly rolls and your strip rolls, and cut them into about 6 inches pieces with regard to the pattern that we're working on. And that gives you plenty of scope for you to position your fabrics, because that is the key thing. You need to position your fabrics. But don't throw away your scraps. Keep your scraps, because sizable scraps can be used for the different points that you've got within your pattern, because sometimes you've only got little tiny pieces, so you can use some of those small scraps up as well and utilize those. So that's my suggestion. Make sure you've got your pieces of fabrics in sizable pieces, not irregular shapes. It just makes it a little bit easier for you to work with if you've got them cut into squares and rectangles and things like that. So we can pop those to the side because we'll use those in a few moments. Now, what I'm actually done, or what I have done, should I say, is I've printed my template onto tracing paper. And the reason being, with tracing paper, you'll be able to see where I'm positioning the fabrics, and hopefully it'll make it a little bit clearer for you as I'm working my way through. So I've got my fabrics, I've got my seam roller, and we will be doing some sewing in a few moments as well. So first thing you need to do, whether you're working with a photocopy version or a tracing paper version, is you're going to fold along all of the printed lines. So work your way along. We're going to be working with this template, and we're going to be folding it in this direction, but we'll also at points be folding it in the opposite direction as well. Now, you don't have to go through and do double folds all the way through, but it just, if you do it in one direction, it just kind of gets you started. Don't be too vigorous with that as well, because you don't want to tear your pattern before you start. And if you are working on tracing paper, it is a little bit thinner, so you just need to be quite aware of how you're going to be working with this. So first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to flip the pattern over, because we're going to be working on the back of the pattern, and your fabrics are going to be facing right side up. So we're going to start off with piece number 1, which is the trunk. So I've got the right side of my fabric facing up, so the wrong side is touching the wrong side of the template. And what you need to do is make sure that the piece of fabric is adequately covering the piece of the template that you're wanting to cover. So it needs to be at least 1/4 inch outside of there. So I'm just going to cover that piece over. We can do a little bit of a visual check. This is where some people will use a basting glue just to attach initially that first piece more so than the other pieces, but it's personal preference. And then all you will do is you'll flip your pattern over, and you can see that the outside of that fabric is way bigger than the piece that I need for the trunk. So I know that's going to be adequate. Keep an eye on those points in the corners as well, because sometimes they can get quite close and you can end up finding that you haven't got a full 1/4 inch there. So just keep an eye on those. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a series of kind of steps that you will find will be very repetitive throughout the course of your project. So let's bring up those steps. So the first thing that you will do is you will fold back the template to the stitch line that you're going to be stitching next. So from piece 1 to piece 2, this is going to be the line that we are going to stitch in a little while. So the first thing I would usually do is fold back my template along that line, and then bring in my rule, find my 1/4 inch, and then cut off that excess fabric. So straight away, I'm kind of making it less complicated with regards to the amount of fabric that I've got. Don't throw that away. That can go into your stuffing bucket, if you have a stuffing bucket. And you can see there now, we've got that nice little kind of seam allowance there. We're going to stitch along that line, and everything is going to come together beautifully. So the next step that we've got is cover with your next piece of fabric. So we're going to flip over, and we're going to cover that original piece that we've got there with our next piece of fabric, which I know is the background fabric. So I'm going to cover that. And what I need to make sure is that when I fold back the template, that there is going to be enough fabric to cover it. Now, this is quite a long piece. We know that is going to be our seam, so we know that the fabric needs to kind of sit along that side. But what we will need to do is check that we're going to adequately cover that area at the same time. So I'll just hold on to that piece like so and flip it over. And you can see with regards to this, you need to fold it back because you've got your background fabric there. So all I'm going to do is on this occasion is hold it on that line there, fold it along the seam line. So that seam line that we've got that we're going to be sewing in a few moments. So if I just jiggle that over, so that's the seam line. And I just need to make sure that that green fabric is going to fill in that area number 2. Well, I don't know if you can see with regards to that little bottom corner there, but we've got an open gap there, just in that little corner there. So I know that that fabric needs to be repositioned. Now, it doesn't matter how far over that join it goes, so I can kind of extend that over there if I'm wanting to. So that doesn't matter, because we'll just trim away the excess as we work. But what I do need to make sure, which is very important, that when I do stitch along that line, that green fabric is going to cover the area that I've got of that template. So again, just reposition it, get the angle right. When you're flipping the pattern over, sometimes it is a little bit difficult to kind of perceive how the fabric is going to sit. So just take a little bit of time, and you can see now all 4 corners of that piece are going to be covered with that green fabric because I've angled it right. But if you look over there, that wouldn't necessarily be the angle you would automatically assume to cover that area, so it's important to fold it over. Once you're happy with that, you can move the pin that you've got in place there and put it back in to keep the 2 fabrics in place. And what we're actually going to do now is flip this over, and we will take it to the machine, and we're going to stitch through that line from that top point to the bottom point. Now we need to make sure that we don't go beyond that line, so we're not going to break through that horizontal seam, which we'll be sewing later on, and we're not going to break through that horizontal seam, which we'll be sewing later on. So we're just going to go from that point to this point, or the other way around, whichever feels more comfortable when we get to the machine. And we're going to reduce the stitch length on our machine to 1.5 to give nice tight little stitches as we go. So let's go across to the machine and stitch that now. When it comes to sewing, you want to make sure that those seams don't unravel. So as you start your seam, just hold your fabric in your template firmly, just for a few stitches. This will give your machine the opportunity to anchor those stitches before you stitch the seam. Remove my pin, and then we will fold this back along that seam line, like so. And you'll be able to see that when I flip it over, that it's covering. Again, remember to hold that fabric at the end of the seam, again anchoring those threads, but make sure you don't go over that connecting line. So, looking back, we've done our pin and sew. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give it a little bit of a press. And you can see that makes that sit nicely. And then we're going to just do exactly the same as before. So we're going to fold back. I'm going to trim away that excess. Like so. And I'm actually going to trim away some of the excess that we've got over here, because we've got quite a big piece of fabric. So I'm just going to kind of give myself a little bit of an extra allowance. So take it to about an inch over that mark, and then just basically just trim that away. So trim to about that point. Just making sure that I've got enough fabric there. In fact, I'll just do it with my scissors, I think. So I'm just going to trim away to that point there, because I know I've got plenty of fabric to do that piece there. So happy with that. That's sitting quite nicely. So now we're going to work on piece 3. You can see we've got loose threads already, so make sure that you're coming in and you're trimming those away as you go, keeping everything neat and tidy. So we've trimmed. We're going to cover our piece of fabric. So again, we're going to come in with piece number 2. Now, let's trim that seam that we're going to be doing as well, because we're going to be trimming that seam. So again, we're going to fold that back. So that's the seam that we're doing next. We're going to fold that back. And it kind of gives us an idea of where we're needing to place that fabric, because if I've got that edge there, it's difficult for me to gauge where the seam is going to be. So that's why I trim away the excess as I work, and it just makes it a little bit more simpler to work with. So again, I can see that I've got my piece there. I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to position my fabric right sides together again with the piece that I'm going to be covering, and that's where my seam's going to be next time. So again, that's the kind of line that we're looking at, but all I'm going to do is this time fold that piece of that pattern back again on that stitch line that we're going to be doing, and I just need to make sure that that piece of fabric that I'm going to be working with next is being covered with 1/4 of an inch around. Now it's a little bit high up the top there, so I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit, and by folding over you can almost finger press the seam and see where that seam is going to be. So I can see when I fold that back, I am more than covering that piece there. If you've got a light box, you might find that easier to actually work on your light box, because the light coming through might help you. So again, I'm just going to hold that fabric in place, make sure I'm happy with the position, pop my pin in, keep my pin well away from the seam that I'm going to be stitching, because I don't want to be stitching through there. And again, we're going to flip over and we're going to stitch through that line, and off we go again. So there we go, stitched through that seam there. So again, I'm just going to remove my pin, open that up, and I can see it's adequately covering that area. I can just do a double check before I do any trimming. There you go, I can see it's more than covering, and again we've got the excess, which we'll take care of in a few moments. Just going to give it that final step, which is after sewing, is pressing. So give it a little press, and you can see these little rollers are really good for this. And I just need to cut away any excess that I've got, which on this occasion I haven't. So there we go, we're okay there. Again, I'm just going to trim away some of that excess that we've got over there. So using that line there, just go outside of that again. Okay, and then we're going to get ready to stitch piece number 4. So again, I'm going to fold back my template along that line, fold back, trim, again, trim away any little excess threads that you've got as well, just stops everything getting caught up. Okay, nice, keep it nice and neat. So now I'm going to cover this area with my next fabric, which is the tree fabric. Now, pattern fabrics, let's have a chat about fabric and pattern fabrics. Obviously there's lots of flipping and turning and rotating and different bits and pieces when you're doing foundation piecing. So I always suggest that you use a non-directional fabric when you're working, because it's one less thing to think about. So again, I'm going to cover this area that we're going to be stitching. So as we go back to our second point, we're going to cover. And we've got the edge there, nice neat edge that we've just created. So that makes it really easy for us to position our fabric next. Again, a couple of pins. Again, keep your pin head away from that seam line that you're going to have there. So everything's nice and flat. I'm going to flip that over, and we're going to stitch from that point now across to that point along that connecting line between the pieces we've laid down already and your next piece, which is number 4. So here we go, stitched along that line. I'm going to remove my pins. Again, before we trim anything away, just fold that back. Make sure that piece number 4 is adequately covered, and you can see it's more than covered that area. So we've sewn, we press, and we're going to fold along the next line. So the next line is the connection between piece 4 and piece 5. So just fold that over, and you can see by having those lines already folded, it makes it much easier. Come back in with your ruler. Oops. Trim. Okay, trim there. We're going to get ready with our next fabric, which is a background fabric. Now this time we've only got quite a small area to cover, so I'm hoping that this smaller piece of scrap that I've got will be enough to cover that. So I'm just going to position that, and I'm going to fold it back along that stitch line, and I can see that that piece of green fabric that I've got there is going to be more than big enough to cover that area. Again, pin in place with the head of the pin being away from the stitch line. Flip it over, and we're going to stitch along that line next. Again, you can see piece number 5 there is more than adequately covered. Again, these little threads, keep getting rid of these little threads as you work, just keeps everything neat and tidy. So if I'm happy with that, I'm going to trim my fabric back and cut along that line again. And we're going to be coming back to the tree fabric. Now you'll notice along the edge here we've got these pieces that are overhanging. It's up to you. You can trim those away as you go if you're wanting to as well, just simply by pulling that back and trimming them. It's up to you. I don't tend to do that at this stage, but we're just going to complete the pattern by working our way up. So back in with the tree fabric. Now I'm just double checking because that little point that we've got there is coming quite close to the edge there. We're okay, I think. So I'm just going to come in with my next piece of fabric, which is the tree fabric. And it's these little outer points that you really need to be careful of when you're using your smaller fabrics, because you can see I've got a big overhang there, but I could have probably done with it a little bit further over there. But hopefully we'll be okay. So I'm going to lay that down like so. I'm going to pull that fabric back like so, and then stitch along that line. What you can do if you are a little bit nervous about those points there is when you come to stitch your next line, rather than stitching on the line, stitch a touch inside of it. Keep that angle going so it's always at the same angle, but bring it a little bit closer to that last seam line if you just want to make sure that any kind of little gaps that you may have created are captured. So I'm going to do that just to be on the safe side. So again, remove your pins, fold that piece back, and now I can see that that little point that I was a little bit unsure of has now been captured. If I'd have taken that seam a little bit further back, it might have been a little loose corner that we had there. So you do have a certain amount of freedom when you're working with this as well. So again, we've sewn, we press. If there's any excess there, then you would trim that away. Always, when you are trimming as well, make sure that your fabrics are folded back, because if that's out and I start trimming, then I'm going to lose that piece of fabric that I need to create my project. The next piece again is background fabric. Again, it's only a small piece that we need, so hopefully this piece will be big enough. And I'm just going to lay that down on top, and then we'll stitch that in place again, folding back the template to make sure that it's covering that area. Slide it down just a little bit. Be careful of those corners again, as I mentioned. So make sure that you're catching that as you go. Make sure that we've got enough covered there and all 3 points are covered, which they are. Pop your pin in place and again take it over to your sewing machine. So come back with piece there, remove your pin, fold it back, and then we're going to trim back that excess fabric like we've done before. Again, make sure that your fabric is out of the way. Go along that fold line of where we've just stitched and trim away that excess so you don't have any bulk of fabric there. And then fold that back. Now, just wanted to show you something that may arise. We spoke of it just a few moments ago with that last piece there. So this piece here, when I actually positioned it, you can see here I didn't really think about the amount of fabric that I'd got that was going to be wasted off to the side here. So I've got way more there than I had on this end. Now I've made it very, very tight for when that next piece of tree fabric comes in place. So if you imagine it's going to be folded over like so, and then it's going to follow that line, you can see that this is again that situation that you might end up where you've got those little raw edges just of that piece there because you didn't position it well. So when you have got your pieces and you're laying them down, do think about, don't keep your bulk of your fabric as your waste of fabric. Bring it into your design so you got those good points there when you're working with them. But as we showed you before, it's not the end of the world. We can rectify that. So simply give that a press. Take away that excess fabric. Now at this stage, what I'm probably going to do is, because we've got quite a bit of excess there now, I'm going to lay the pattern down, fold it back, get my 1/4 inch seam again, trim that away, get rid of all those pieces. So I've got that nice neat edge then down the edge when I come to it. If I'm doing that side, might as well do the other side as well. Okay, so you can see it's starting to take shape. So the next fabric is your tree fabric. So I'm going to fold along that line. So the next line that we're going to be putting in place is between the pieces that were stitched and piece number 8. So fold along that line. Get my nice neat edge to work with. Tree fabric, right sides together. And again, on this occasion, I've got plenty of fabric again. If you can, don't be too stingy. That's my only advice. I'm the worst one for that, to be honest, because I'd be thinking, oh, I've got a lot of excess there. Let me just bring that down a little bit. And you can end up where you find those situations like we've got arisen in the middle there. So try not to be too stingy with regards to your fabrics. It does make life a little bit easier in the long run if you don't worry too much about those bits that you've got there. Now again, this is the line that we're going to be stitching along between piece 8 and piece 7 and 6, which we've done before. But again, I'm going to stitch and I'm going to keep it on this side of the line to make sure that I catch in that little raw edge that we've got there. So when I come over here, I'm just going to get my pen just to illustrate. Rather than stitching on that line there, I'm going to come in just a little bit off to the side. If you want to draw a line, you can do. You don't have to, but you could draw a little line if you wanted to along there and stitch along that line instead. So let's go and sew that. So again, I've sewn. I'm going to press, and because again we came this side of the line, you can see that I've caught in that little area that was the tricky point before. So press. Okay. Trim off any excess if you want to. And we're going to get ready with our next piece, with background piece number 9. So I'm going to fold along that line. Trim. And then come in with background piece. A background piece here. Again, use those little scraps as you're working with those. So flip it over, right sides together. Now remember, we've learnt something, that we need to make sure that this fabric at that point is overhanging, and that is more important for the overhang to be at this end than the excess over on this side. But you still need to be mindful that when you fold that piece back, it's still going to be captured with that fabric that you've got, which it will be. Pop your pin in place, flip over, and we're going to stitch that seam. Also as well, when you're sewing, make sure that you're keeping your fabrics nice and flat and that they don't move. So stitch through that line there, take that pin out, come with your little seam roller. Okay, happy with that. If you've got your excess fabric, then you can trim that away at that point, but because we lined up the edges, you don't always tend to have that there. I'm going to open that up. That's going to be our next stitch line, so I'm going to fold along that line, Oops, no I'm not. I'm going to fold along that line there and trim away any excess to give myself a nice neat edge. Next fabric is tree fabric. So again, right sides together along that nice neat edge we've created. Pin. Oops. Try again. There you go. So keep everything nice and flat, and then we're going to stitch along that seam between the two. Again, we've stitched, pins out, move that back and press it. Again, if you've got that excess, you can fold back your pattern. Trim away that excess. Don't forget those little threads. We've got quite a few of those now because I haven't been paying attention to those, so just trim those away as well. You don't have to, but I just think it makes it a little bit easier to work with. Folding that back. So the next line that we're going to be doing is this one here. So fold that back. So still following that procedure that we've got on our little blackboard on the screen. So we're going to fold back, trim, cover with your new piece, fold back and check, pin and sew. And press. So you can see it's building up quite nicely. Fold back and trim back to that first point. And now we're just looking at that last piece, which is piece number 12. So again, right sides together. So we're going to trim that seam. So again, fold back and trim. Cover with new piece. Fold back and check. Now again, on this occasion, as soon as I fold that back, I can see that the point at the top of the Christmas tree isn't captured with that piece. So I'd need either a wider piece, or I could just rotate that round and have it that way. So again, line up those raw edges, fold that piece back, and now you can see there's plenty of fabric there to cover that area. So back in with my pin. And then we're going to stitch that last seam there that we've got on our actual tree. So there we go. You see how our trees come together. So all I'm going to do now is fold back my fabric here and trim away that excess. And then again, fold back that piece. And trim away my excess. So you can see how the tree's coming together. Just need to do this bottom piece now, which is piece number 30. So fold back. And trim. Cover it with your background fabric. Now that's not going to be wide enough, so that piece will. We're just going to line that over there, and again fold back just to make sure that it's covering the area, which it is. And then sew along that line. Oops. There we go. You can see how our trees come in together. And again, just going to trim off that excess of that last piece. Now just be careful because that needs to sit. There you go. Don't want to go trimming too much off. There we go. So now we have our main tree finished. So the next thing that we need to do is to fill in these two larger pieces. Now this is where you have your choices. Are you going to keep your piece so when you put those pieces in it's going to be the same size as your A4 sheet, or are you going to go on and create those extender pieces to make your cushion cover? So let's turn this into the cushion cover front. So we're going to take those extender pieces that we've got and we're going to attach these to our paper template. So all you need to do is to overlap the grey area that you've got, like so, and just use a little bit of tape to put those in place. So put your tape on to start with. And it's the edge of your fabric, sorry, the edge of your pattern with the edge of the grey area, like so. And you do that on the other side as well. Oops. Oh dear, making a right meal of this. Okay. So again, it's the edge of your paper covering that grey area. I haven't lined up the edges here, but don't worry too much, it's more about that width. So we're going to do exactly as we did before. We're going to flip over and we're going to cover that area with our fabric. So you come in with your larger piece of fabric, right sides together again, and line it up, making sure that all of the pieces are sitting nice and flat. Again, if you want to use a little bit of that basting glue to keep the pieces flat, then you can do. So it might be that along here you just want to add a little bit of glue because of these being the loose edges. And then you come in right sides together, and again we can utilise that line that we created, that nice neat line. We're going to fold back again where the stitch line is, and again make sure that the background for 14 as well as the extenders is caught within your fabric, which we can see that it is. So I'm just going to fold that back, put a few pins to stop it moving around, and then stitch down that section there next to piece number 14. So rewind a little while, and I stitched, when I went over to the machine I accidentally stitched through that seam.
Oh no.
When I should have actually stitched through that seam. So
did you notice what I
gently
did?
unpick it, because even though
Although
you're
I
using a
positioned the
template,
fabric
you
correctly,
can still
I accidentally
unpick.
stitched along the
But
line
obviously
for
when you
piece
stitch through your
15.
template, then you create these
So there's only one thing that we can
perforations, which
do,
can mean
and that's
that
unsew.
it makes it a little bit trickier, and your template is vulnerable to kind of come apart. So you can use a little bit of tape if you're wanting to secure those areas that you've broken through, and that means you can go through and stitch without any issue at a later stage. So I've just put that on there just to protect that area. Just fold that underneath there. So I'm going to do exactly as I did before. So I'm going to flip that fabric over, flip the template over. I'm going to come in with my fabric. Excuse me. Come in with my fabric. Lay it up against that line again, like so. Fold the template back, make sure that that's where I'm going to be stitching. Make sure you've got the overhang on both edges. Pin it in place again. Again, it doesn't matter about lining it up perfectly there. You can have that overhang. And this time I'm going to make sure that I'm stitching down this side. Now, if you want to, then what you could do is come along with a quilt clip to remind you that this is the edge that you're going to be stitching. And then that way, when I take it to the machine, I've got the right edge that I'm going to be working with. So now I have stitched in the right area, and you'll notice that the stitching, I took it beyond the actual template. This is all going to be trimmed away and excess fabric, so it doesn't matter if you run off at that point. So again, move your pins. Press your seam. Pull those threads out in a little while. And you can see now we've got our piece of fabric there, which when we trim away the excess will be the edge of our block. So might as well trim that down. So you can add in your 1/4 of an inch again at this point if you're wanting to. The piece of the block that you've got at the moment is measuring 12 inches. So if you do want to add in the extra, then obviously do trim off your 1/4 of an inch, and that means that you, when you come to sew it into place, you'll still have your 12-inch block there. And again, your 12 inches at the top there, with your extra 1/4 of an inch, and trim that away as well. And again at the bottom, So you can see how it's coming together there with your block. So again, we're going to do the same with the background piece here. So you're going to come in with your piece of fabric. Again, you're going to use that raw edge that you've got there. And you're going to fold back exactly as we've done before. And you can see on this corner, the fabric isn't covering that corner there. So that piece that I've got there isn't going to be big enough. So I'm going to come in with another piece. Line up that raw edge. Fold that fabric piece back along what will be the seam, and I can see now that that fabric is more than covered with that that template is more than covered with the fabric. So again, I'm just going to lay that down, a few pins to secure, and then back over to the machine to do that final seam. Move the pins. Give it that final press. And then trim away that excess. So there we go, your finished piece. So all I would do then is give it a final press with your iron, and then it comes to removing the papers. So when it comes to removing the papers, what you need to do is remove them in the order or the reverse order. So start off with piece number 15. And all you're going to do is tear along that perforation, but make sure you are supporting the rest of the fabrics as you go. Now don't forget, this is the one that we added that tape to, so it's going to be a little bit trickier to remove than the others because it's got that plastic tape on top. So be careful when you're actually pulling at these that you're not actually tugging at the stitches, and that you're breaking the perforation and moving the paper template away. So number 15 done. Again, piece number 14. You can see obviously easier because we haven't got that additional tape, and you can just pull away these little pieces as you go as well. Piece number 13. So hold the stitches in place as you pull, and take those pieces away as you go. And it's basically just a case of just pulling those pieces out and getting rid of them as you work your way through. Just be mindful of those stitches. You don't want to tug on those stitches and tear them. There we go. So all done, all ready for you to use your trim around the edge if you're going to be popping it into a block, or you can go on and create your cushion following the instructions if you've gone for the cushion. So there you go. English paper piecing, foundation piecing should I say, as opposed to English paper piecing. So yeah, there you go. Nice way of creating pieces of fabric that you can go on and then utilise in lots of different ways. Obviously you can use that at any point if you wanted to make it a larger block, or if you wanted to just use the tree as it is for an applique piece, then you can do that. But it's basically a technique that I think is fabulous. Once you get your head around it, following those instructions that you can see on your screen, as you can see there on the little blackboard, just go through those repetitive natures, and there you go, you end up with a fabulous project completed. Don't forget, if you want to follow more of our video tutorials, like and subscribe, and you can leave your comments in the messages as well if you're wanting to, yeah, we'll bring you some more videos as time goes on. Let us know what you'd like to see. So that's me, Hayley, signing off. Thank you for joining me on this little tutorial, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. So I've taken my block that I created and I've added in some extra fabric. So the extra fabric has been attached to the right and left hand side of the quilt block, and then I've added an extra 2.5 inches of fabric to the top and also the bottom as well. And then all I did was to turn it into a cushion, was to add an envelope back, and there we go, got a fabulous cushion ready for the Christmas season. So there we go, enjoy.